So you've seen the unboxing of the brand new RNC 24mm aluminum cranks. Today we're going to be installing these cranks onto my bike. I said in the unboxing that I was going to read more info about these, so I'm going to do that real quick off my phone so I can make sure I have all of this right. So it says made from a proprietary 7000 series aluminum with a 103,000 tensile strength, 30% stronger and harder than 7075 aluminum, and a higher strength to weight ratio than 6A-L4V titanium, or in other words, what these cranks are made of. It also says 24mm 80 tooth titanium spindle made from beta grade titanium that's heat treated to an unbelievable 220,000 tensile strength. This titanium has the highest strength of any titanium and also has the highest strength to weight ratio of any metal in existence. Cranks come with 2 aluminum arms, titanium spindle, and tie flush mount bolts. Titanium sprocket adapters are available. So this right here, titanium sprocket adapter, so that you can run profile sprockets. This is a profile adapter. Profile doesn't actually make a 24mm spline drive adapter. There's also RNC sprockets. He sent me one of these, so I figured I would show you guys it. It is a 28 RNC sprocket that is made with this adapter in mind. And before we can actually install them, I need to uninstall all of what I have going on here. And I guess to do that, I'm gonna just go ahead and time lapse through real quick. So one thing I wanna show you guys right now is the difference between 80 and 48 splines on the spindles. Check this out. So right here is the original 48 spline, 22mm solid titanium crank spindle. So you can see it's 48 spline. This is recognizable to you. Well, here is 80 splines. So you can see the difference here. I mean, there is a much finer tooth here, and there's science behind this. I'm not going to pretend like I know or understand any of it, but I'm going to be testing it for you. So one thing here, I'm gonna have to get this bottom bracket out, so we're just gonna go ahead and cut to the bottom bracket being out and being ready to install the new bottom bracket in. Let's go. One thing to consider before we even think about putting any type of bearings back into the frame is the bottom bracket spacer. This is the one that came out of the frame. This is the spacer that is sent with the bottom bracket kit that you can get for these cranks. And if we compare, you can see that the spacer I have in here is a little bit longer, so I'm gonna have to figure out how many spacers I have to add in here to compensate for that. But with that being said too, it's common that different frames have different width bottom brackets. I'm assuming it'll probably just be like 2 that will make up for that difference. Okay, so 2 isn't quite enough. And I do believe I have 1 smaller spacer. I don't know that I would want to use this in here or not. Yeah, that makes it 100% perfect. So that's my spacing on there. But another thing I wanted to make sure I got the point across to you guys with that I mentioned in the unboxing is that these bearings are proprietary to these cranks right here. If you just want to get the bearings, it's $25 for just the bearings. You can buy the bottom bracket kit that comes with cone spacers that RNC makes. You can get that kit that comes with the spacer, the bearings, and the cone spacers. It's all on the site, but it's all available. I just want to make sure that we got that across because it'd be a bummer if you bought a 24mm bottom bracket from somewhere else and it ended up being too small. That being said, we now know our spacing, which means we can install the bottom bracket. And I like giving a below view for this, so we're gonna jump to the below view now and install this bottom bracket. I need to use the Polylube 1000 in my bottom bracket tube where the bearings go, just to make sure that we have the proper ease of installing by having this lubricated. So do both sides, making sure it is well done. So now we can grab the bottom bracket press and prepare it for installing the bearings. So we take off one side, take off half of the hardware, and then we grab one of our bearings and put it onto the press. Then put it into the frame, grab all of my spacers and drop one so that I have to pause the video for a second. Slide it in, then we can grab our other bearing and slide it onto the setup, and then we can put everything else back onto the press. Polylube around the bearings. This can always be cleaned off later, and I just want to make sure that bearings are square. And once we make sure our bearings are squared up, we can start tightening down the press, which will press the bearings into the frame. As you're seeing, we tighten this down until all of our bearings are tightened into the frame. That is good. It may be a bit of a pain because we have all these extra spacers in there to like line everything up. So the first thing that I want to figure out is sprocket and adapter and how much I actually am going to need when it comes to putting spacers between the bearing and the sprocket. I don't necessarily know if I want to use this cone spacer or not, because I don't know where that will put my chain alignment. So I don't think I really want to do that, because you can see my driver right here. When I push the sprocket in and focus up here, the alignment on that isn't quite right. I feel like it needs to be closer in. So if we take off that spacer and we slide this on, obviously it's against the frame right now, but the chain alignment would be much better if we had it as close as we can get it. So it is hitting the frame if I don't have anything there. So this is where I need to figure out how many of these spacers I need to put on here in order to get it far enough away from the frame and as close chain alignment wise as possible. So I'm just gonna slide one on there. It looks like one, it would still hit the frame. What about two? Two, we are far enough away from the frame that I think we'll be okay. And I think at that point, I mean, chain alignment is as good as it's going to be at that. So I think with two of those on there, I am safe to put my adapter onto the spindle and then grab my, backwards. Sprocket goes on, then adapter. Because on this sprocket, the adapter goes on the outside. So sprocket, adapter. Now line it up. Another thing to consider in all of this is where the sprocket or where the crank arm aligns with the frame. So I'm gonna find where I wanna put this. That looks pretty good. Now, we may end up having to add spacers on the outside of the sprocket. So I found that I'm gonna put 3 of these spacers on the outside of the sprocket for now. And then I'm just gonna get everything lined up here and toss this crank arm onto this side. I should actually, before we get any further, start to use grease at this point. I was just test fitting everything and didn't want to deal with the mess up to this point, but definitely want to use grease on this. This is 2 different types of metal, and if there's anything I've ever heard, it's that 2 different types of metal like to seize to each other whenever you're in situations like this. So I am going to put lots of grease in here. This is the right crank arm, making sure everything is correct so I don't have to go too crazy backwards if anything goes wrong. So let's go ahead and put this crank onto the spindle on this end. This is as far as you would really want to go. We're using the tool that was sent with these cranks that goes onto a 3/8 driver. We've got this side on plenty of space here. If I need to take some off later, I can. But now we're gonna move to the other side, which should be pretty straightforward. You know, we just take the bolt back off, grab and throw our non-drive side spacer, grab our other crank arm, make sure we get poly lube all inside the splines. There we go, that is correct. Okay, that one is on. You can put our bolt in. We may have to pull some more spindle through. We said how this side was about as far as you'd want to go through the crank. And we also have a little bit of spindle left from this not being all the way tightened up yet. There we go. Much, much better. I have the cranks installed fully. They have great spacing away from the frame. There is adequate spindle on both sides. The spindle is going most of the way through the cranks, even with all of the spacers that I have in there. My chain alignment is as good as I can get it. And now it is time to put my pedals back on. So I'm gonna go ahead and put some grease into this pedal boss, is that what it's called? Onto my threads of my pedal spindle as well, just because I don't want any seizing to happen or anything goofy that I might not be expecting. But we've got this, so we tighten towards the front of the bike with the bike upright. If the bike is sitting the way that it normally is when you're riding it, you tighten towards the front of the bike on both sides. So we get this tightened down, and this is like kind of one of my only reservations when it comes to these cranks is that I've never had aluminum cranks before with aluminum pedal bosses where your pedals go in there. So I'm just going to be interested to see how this actually goes, and we will definitely keep you guys tuned and updated about this. That's why I'm testing these. I'm giving honest review and honest take on these pedals or these cranks. Get some poly lube into the crank arm. Once again, tightening towards the front of the bike. Give it a good tightening, and this is something I'm going to definitely be sure that I check on and make sure that these are staying tight, because I want to make sure that I don't cause any problems that wouldn't have been there otherwise. Chain around the sprockets. Boom. That was easy enough. Tighten that down, and there we go. Is it crank flippable? At this point, these cranks are installed. Solid aluminum RNC cranks are officially installed on my bike. So upon editing this video, I found that I just didn't like my outro and conclusion, and there were some afterthoughts that I wanted to make sure that I included in this video that makes me want to record a new outro for you guys right now. So first of all, I want to talk about actually installing these cranks. Once the bottom bracket and everything was installed, installing the crank arms and getting spacing and everything like that was a breeze. It was so much smoother and easier than RNC's previous two-piece cranks, just in the fact that these crank arms could come off and go on independently of each other, which just makes getting your spacing and putting them on and taking them off for that a breeze. Then the fact that these splines, both on the spindle and in the crank arms themselves, are just much more refined and smoother than the previous cranks. It just makes them go on and off so much easier with one hand. It doesn't take a ton of force, but when you tighten everything down, it's snug and nothing wobbles or anything like that. Then there's a lot of people online talking about these cranks in comparison to the original Primo Power Bites because of the fact that the pedal boss is threaded in the aluminum with no chromoly insert or anything like that. So your chromoly spindled pedals are tightening directly into aluminum. There's a lot of speculation there, and Ryan at RNC had some thoughts. I'll throw them on the screen right now. My personal thoughts on this are that I've never ridden Primo power bites or any other aluminum cranks, so I don't know what's gonna happen. I would anticipate that something could happen, but until it does, I'm not gonna say one way or the other. That's why I'm here putting them on my bike and testing them and then giving you guys a review after I've ridden them for an adequate amount of time. So the last two things that I want to talk about here real quick are that if you need extra spacers between your bottom bracket bearings like I did, those tiny little spacers, don't install your whole bottom bracket like I did at one time and then try to line up your spindle with all of those spacers after the fact. There's an easier way to do it, and I have a bike build video with my buddy Dustin's bike where we show that because he needed extra spacers too, and there's a much better way coming in a future video, so just stay tuned for that. And the last thing is just talking about the tool that you use to tighten these cranks and the bolts themselves. It is a 12mm Allen. Like you saw in the video, there is a star tool included that goes on a 3/8 driver, but I recognize that there's probably some people out there like me who like to have something in both bolts at the same time when you're tightening. So it's a 12mm Allen, and I just gotta say again, the process for installing these cranks was a very smooth process other than that bump in the road with the spacers. And had I thought about installing them the way that I show in this future video, it definitely would have been just as smooth as installing and getting the spacing for the cranks themselves. So ultimately, I'm excited to ride these things and give you guys my first thoughts and impressions in a video coming very soon where I first ride them and just do a couple tests and things like that. And then my final review after an adequate amount of time on these cranks. So I wanna thank you for watching this. I hope you enjoyed it. There's links in the description down below to learn more about these, but I'm not giving a recommendation quite yet. So thanks again for watching. Subscribe if you haven't, and hopefully we'll see you tomorrow for another video. Goodbye.